Over the past 7 years, I have failed more times than I can count. Broken tools, wasted materials, and I've wanted to give up more times than I'd like to admit. Hey guys, welcome to my shop. So I thought it would be cool to put my favorite projects together in one video, start to finish, so you can easily see my progression over the years. The failures, the hard times, and the final projects. It's been one heck of a ride, and if you've been here from the beginning, first of all, thank you for your support. But second, if you recognize any of these builds from the past, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear which one is your favorite. So let's get into it.
I began the project by going through my scrap wood pile and finding a piece of wood suitable for the base. I found this 3/4 inch piece of MDF that'll work perfectly. For the side rails, I'll be using a scrap piece of 2x4, cutting it down to 1 inch by 1 inch. Next, I took the side rail pieces over to the router table to put a soft round over on all the edges. To make this gap in the center piece, I got out my crosscut sled for my table saw. The height of the blade determines the depth of the cut, which I wanted to be a 1/2 inch. Using some spray paint I had on hand, I painted the base and the side rails. MDF will be really rough after your first coat of paint, so it's important to sand in between coats. I'm using my CNC here, but this is way overkill. You could easily just buy a 1 inch dowel from your home goods store and cut it down to size for pucks. I'm using a combination of wood glue and CA glue to attach the side rails.
Set.
Ready? Wait, you guys start with this.
Ready, set, go.
The brass I'm using for this project is from a local factory. They produce brass ammunition cartridges. It's a byproduct that they produce, and I was able to get my hands on some of it. So it's safe to say you'll probably see a couple more brass and epoxy projects.
For this project, I'm using Total Boat's 2-to-1 high performance epoxy for no particular reason other than I had it in my shop, and that's what I use for most of my projects. I used about a total of 50 ounces for this project. You can see me using a torch here as I'm stirring the epoxy, and that is to pop any bubbles or as many bubbles as possible before I pour. It also increases the viscosity in how the epoxy flows. Now that the epoxy is dried and cured, I took it over to my table saw to square up the ends using my crosscut sled. The next step is to flatten both sides of this piece. I debated on how to do this, whether to run this through my planer, which I thought was a bad idea because of the brass shavings. I settled on using my CNC machine to level it. I'm using a bowl and tray bit to do this. I don't have an official stock leveling bit. They're pretty expensive too, but I figured I'd get this bowl and tray bit to work. Overall, I took off about a 1/16 of an inch on both sides to get the entire piece flat. This brought the final stock thickness to 3/4 of an inch. Now that it's flat, let's carve the tray. Now for the exciting part, sanding. No, not really, but there was a lot of sanding involved. I started with 80 grit, and then the final sanding was with 120 grit. I had a little blowout right here from the CNC bit, and so I'm using CA glue to fix it, and it'll sand and you won't even be able to see the difference. Once I got the rough sanding done, I took the piece over to my router table and with a round over bit put a nice round over on the outside edges. Okay, now all the shaping and sanding is finished. So now it's time to apply the finish coat. I decided to go with a brushed on coat of the same epoxy that it is made out of. One trick that I've picked up when you're doing pours like this that'll spill over the edge is to tape off the edges. That way the epoxy won't run down onto your finished side. You can just peel the tape off and it'll be a nice clean edge. For this project, we'll be starting with this rough sawn walnut. First step is to get it milled down to size. Let's do that now. So this piece is going to be the top, so we are going to cut it at 18 inches. This piece is going to be the legs, so we are going to cut it into two 9-inch sections. Okay, so I almost forgot. I was going to cut this at 9 inches, but it's not a straight cut. It's actually an angled cut. So I'm going to use this cracked cutoff to get my angle right because I'm not exactly sure on the angle that these legs need to sit. Remember, this is my scrap test piece. The leg is going to sit like that. This degree ended up being 7 degrees. So I'm trying to figure out how to cut these legs the same size, the same length, because they do have the 7-degree miter on them, on the ends. So I think if I line up these and make them flush, even though they're going at an angle, if I cut right here on my angle, I think they'll be the same size. Because I do need the two angles like this going the same direction on each end. I don't know. Let's see if it works. So here's the two legs, and I think it worked. Alright, so we got these pieces milled up and cut to size. I'm going to wait on this piece. This is the center support piece that goes in between the legs. I just want to make sure I get the right size on that. Pocket holes and pocket screws is the joinery method that we're going to use. Like it or not, it's effective and strong. So, and pretty simple. You can use whatever joinery method that you want to use, but that's what I'm going to use for this one. Also, I'm going to take it over and sand all these pieces before we assemble them. It'll be a lot easier to sand them now than when it's assembled. So let's do that now. Alright, everything is sanded. I've got my pocket holes drilled, and now it's time to assemble the legs to the top, so let's do that now. Working with 1-inch thickness, Craig calls for a 1.5-inch Craig jig screw. Well, I don't have any 1.5-inch Craig jig screws, but I do have these 1.5-inch screws. So I'm all about making it work. So we are going to do that.
Cut the angles, put pocket holes in, sand it, and then we'll slide it up, and wherever it meets, kind of like right there, is where it will end up. Alright, now everything is assembled. Got everything matched up pretty well. I'm going to put a chamfer on this top edge, which I think is going to look really good. And once I'm done with that, then I'm going to sand one final sanding over everything. Then it'll be time for finish. Let's jump right into the design. We're going to start with a 2-inch thick walnut slab that is 8 feet long. We're going to cut that down to 60 inches. We're going to do one continuous pour of epoxy. The first step is to get this slab milled down to the correct size. Alright, now that I got the slab broken down into 2 pieces, the next step is to put it in the form. Before I do that, I had a couple cracks and checks reveal themselves as I was milling them up. So I'm going to have to go through with some epoxy or CA glue in some of these and fill them before I put them in the form. So I started at 2 inches and my final thickness is 1.5 inches. So that's where I'm going to be. That's how deep my pour is going to be. That's the max depth of the epoxy that I'm using to pour at one time.
You got me down again.
The form I'll be using for this is made out of MDF with home wrap tape. I went ahead and built it ahead of time off camera just to speed up the process. There's nothing really to it. It's important just to get it watertight. Mine measures 60 inches by 18 inches wide,
and it's just completely waterproof. I've got caulk running around the outside. The only thing left to do is to get the clamps on this, and then we're gonna be ready to pour. So to achieve the look that we're going for, we're gonna use Chill Epoxy's opaque black chill drops. So this isn't gonna be see-through, it's just gonna be solid black. All right, now that we got it out of the form, we're gonna take it over to the CNC to try and flatten it. So here's the slab. It's been a long time getting to this point, but it's gonna be well worth it. It took over 8 hours on the CNC to flatten both sides. It normally wouldn't take that long, but I used the bit that I had, but I'll definitely invest in a flattening bit next time. It probably would have cut the time in a fourth. There are other ways to flatten a slab. Many people have gone over and used those ways. So by no means, if you don't have a CNC, you can still get this done. So I squared up the edges, but the next step is to sand. And now I'm not gonna bore you guys with all the sanding, but just know that I'm gonna start with 120 grit because this thing is very smooth already. Get any imperfections out of it, and I'm gonna end on 300. Everything is sanded. The next step is to cut the miter joints to make the 2 legs in the tabletop. And we're gonna cut those on the table saw using the cross-cut sled. Here are the 3 separate pieces, the 2 legs, the tabletop. In order to get the geometry for this waterfall look, we had to cut the miter, but then you saw that we had to take a triangle out, and that way these angles right here will line up. All right, the next step is to get these 3 pieces jointed together. There's gonna be 2 joints here. To strengthen this miter joint, I'm going to be using dowels. It's been an hour. That 5-minute epoxy cures in an hour. I'm not gonna put any weight or anything on it. Next step is to sand it and get some finish on it. So a company approached me. They said, hey, can we come up with 10 prototypes? Basically, these 10 signs are the framework that the customization will go in. It was my job to come up with 10 prototypes that are highly repeatable. This is the process of going from conversation to shipping them out to the company. On the front end, what I want to do is I want to think through how to reproduce these. This isn't making one sign or an order of 10. This is with the forethought of I'm gonna make hundreds of these. So as you watch this process, think about that. I need to set up my supply chain. I need to set up repeatable steps. This video is me going through those steps. Everything on the sign is cut with a 60-degree V-bit, and that is intentional because tool changes slow down production. My first thought was to stain the poplar, lay the aura mask over top, cut it with the CNC, spray it with a clear coat, and then spray paint it. So the carve just finished up, and this is staining first, putting the aura mask over, and then carving it. And you can see shadows there. It's fairly clean. Remember, this is the one I stained before, then laid the masking on. I'm somewhat happy with it, but look over here. Got all nasty. What I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna try to run this through the drum sander. I don't know if this is gonna work or not. And see if I can clean some of it up. That's my only solution. And then restain it. So it looks like I'm gonna be staining afterwards. So I just ran it through the drum sander, and surprisingly that worked really, really well. Look at that. That's the one that bled over. So I'm gonna restain this, and I think we'll be in business. So this navy sign just came off the CNC. I'm trying a different technique. I didn't mask anything. As you can see, I'm gonna go paint it black right now with no masking, and then I'm gonna run it through the drum sander and see if I can skip the masking step. The technique of not masking and spraying the whole thing, I don't think it's gonna work. I think I'm gonna have to mask. If you look, you can see I was sanding, and I had to sand so much I lost some of the detail. And I still haven't gotten all the black paint off. So I definitely will have to mask going forward. So staining it does hide paint imperfections, but I'm still gonna, it's not worth skipping the step of masking, even though it's a little time consuming to peel all off. So at this point, I've tried a couple different techniques. I have decided that the best approach at this point is to mask the poplar, cut it on the CNC, spray it with the clear coat, peel the masking off, run it through the drum sander, and then staining them. Let's jump into the montage and finish the last 8 signs. Right, here's the first test. Turned out pretty good, except you see it left a little bit on the edges right here. So that worked pretty good. I just ran that path. I did have it set to do with no offset on the tool path, and then I just changed it to cut the inside of the tool path, and that 1/16 inch of an offset cleaned it up really well. So now I'll move on to cutting out the profile. After cleaning up really good, that's one thing I would say about this, is I need to figure out a better way to keep the area clean, because it is very messy. And obviously I don't want to use my dust collector and suck metal through it. So yeah, if you guys have any solutions or what do you do, let me know down in the comments, because I definitely, I'm just using a shop vac. You can see me in the video trying to keep the clear out where I'm not recutting the chips. One thing that I've seen people do is you can use adaptive clearing. With Fusion 360, I know you can use it. With Carbide Motion, you cannot, and that's what I've been using. So I saw that using an oil can help with lubrication. I don't know. Again, I'm just learning here. This is what I just had on the shelf. I know this isn't like tap and die oil or machining oil, but I was using this 3-in-1 oil. Multi-purpose oil. It seemed to clump things up. Trying to get all these shavings out. When I would add it, it was quieter, but it seemed like things clumped up, and then when the cutter came through, you could hear them hit them. So I don't know. don't know if a different oil will help with that. All right, so the next step is to get this threaded rod threaded into the back of this. So I need to find the center, drill and tap the threads in here, and then this nut will tighten down on it and hold it in place. I'm going to cut off this end, and I'm going to use I'm gonna use this whole thing. No, I'm joking. This is actually a gun stock from Remington. I didn't cut it off a gun, don't worry. You just gotta know the right people. So I'm not gonna use the whole thing. I'm gonna cut a part of this, sand it down, and use it for the handle. Check this out. Being a good business owner is being resourceful and problem solving. And this is an example of that, and I'm glad that the idea finally hit me. Like, look, I have these materials laying around. I can make this. So now I have a branding iron, literally, with things that were laying around the shop and given to me over the last couple of years. I've wanted to get into milling things other than wood, and honestly, I was scared to do it. But it's not that hard. There's feeds and speeds published all over, and I included mine in this video, which they're extremely conservative. You can do it, even with a desktop machine. This is a really good way when you're getting started to save money when running a business. You know, we all think we need all these things to make all these things happen, but I challenge you to look around you for the things that you do have and ways to save money. This would have cost me 80 to 100 bucks if I would have ordered it. So literally, this was my first time milling any kind of metal. This is one of my favorite techniques to learn something new, is kind of this mashup of materials and techniques. With no preconceived, I'm gonna build this. The worst case scenario, we're gonna end up with the knowledge of this is how this material works, or this is how this technique can work. This is in Carbide Create, and there's a texture button over here. So if you hit texture, all these different crazy numbers pop up, and this is how you create the different textures. So you can put in different parameters, different step over, different variations. So I messed with this until I got something that I liked. And this one right here, the step over variation, means that it's random. And then you can see max depth, max length. So this, literally, you can do any kind of texture you could imagine. with this right here. So the whole idea of this experiment, we have this textured surface, right? So it can be used as decorative, but I wanted to be able to use it as a surface. So my thought was is take some epoxy and just put a thin layer on it to create a flat usable surface. So I just got the tape off, and I think that works pretty good. Alright, so I didn't want to get too carried away with sanding, but I cleaned up all the blue tape. I'd finish this, sand it just like normal, and then apply some kind of finish, and it'll be crystal clear again. Okay, so the first thing I did was take that block over to the bandsaw, and I cut like 1/8 inch pieces. Now this material is not cheap, so I wanted to make it go as far as it possibly can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this to a bigger piece of plywood, and that'll give us more working area of these layers. I got a little bit of all the colors in here. See the red, white, and blue mixed in together. To get these perfectly smooth, I'm going to run them through the drum sander, and then we'll figure out where we're going to go from there. Intentionally did not run the dust collection. 1, so I could film it better. 2, so I don't know what it looks like. All right, so first let's look at this technique. What did I learn from this technique? Where can it be used? One idea that I thought of is it would be really cool to texture some drawer fronts, even if you didn't use this colorful plywood. But this random technique would look really cool, even if you included some stain. This has a ton of opportunities. Think about it. You can make coasters with that texture because now it's a flat surface. It's not rough like this, and it's really durable. So I thought that was really cool. I can definitely see using this combination in the future, taking it one step farther than this and getting this. So I think that's a really cool process. Just starting with something, taking one step, and like, oh, that's cool. Well, what if I did this to it? Or what if I did this to it? You know, kind of iterating, not necessarily an idea, but on different techniques or different material. This plywood is really cool. So I got this. There's a bunch of companies that make it. It's really dense, Baltic birch, and they infuse the color all the way through it and then lay it in different patterns. The company that I got this from was called Frog Blanks. In their clearance section, I just wanted to check out a couple of pieces and see what it's all about. But it's really high quality stuff, very expensive, and that's why I went with this and cut it into thinner layers so you really can get a lot of it out of it. A couple things that I look forward to doing in the future is some topographical maps. I think that's really, really cool. This material has been used for gun stocks, knife scales, really a lot of uses. So like I said at the very beginning of this video, this was an experimental project. Most of my projects I have an end goal in mind, but for this, I was literally like, hey, I could take this strategy, or I can take this material and combine techniques with materials that I haven't done before and see what it comes up with. And worst case scenario, you don't have a usable product, but you have the knowledge for the next thing. So in this case, it's a huge success. So my parents are obsessed with islands. They spend time in the summer up in a place called Hessel, Michigan, and they spend time in the winter a place called Big Pine Key in Florida. So I took these two places, wanted to put them on one map. There's 3,000 miles separating them, so I couldn't do the whole path. So I took the islands from the north and the islands from the south and combined them together to get this piece. All right, so I'm gonna start this project by building a frame. All right, so here's the frame that I came up with. I just need a little sanding. There's a couple gaps, but that's trademark of Andy Bird Builds, gaps. What I am gonna do is I'm gonna take some CA glue and I'm gonna run it around this inside edge where the epoxy is gonna be poured, just to seal it up. And just as a safety precaution, because if you've ever poured epoxy before, leaks are the worst. So I'm going to use some of this home wrap tie-back tape. Okay, so for the epoxy pour, I'm going to be using this leftover Total Boat epoxy I have. High performance. I think this is slow hardener. It'll work well for this background. I know my last project mixed well, so I'm literally just going to use all of this and dumping it into a cup. So it's already pre-measured basically. Since this art piece is going to kind of be two different locations, the waters are two different colors. So I figured, why not use two different colored epoxies and have them meet in the middle. So I'll use a darker blue for like the Great Lakes, and I'll use more of a Caribbean blue for the Florida Keys. I think it'll look pretty cool. So while the epoxy resin is curing, we're going to do some computer work and get the files ready to send over to the laser printer. I'm going to laser print the island maps, all the pieces. I'm not going to go over in detail how I'm going to do it because, to be honest with you, I'm going to kind of stumble through it. There's a lot of people out there already that have put together tutorials on how to get map data, so I'll see you when I'm done. Alright, so the laser just finished up. What I've seen other people do is they'll score their bottom layer. So if I was going to put my islands on top of this, I could score the bottom layer and then literally just boop, put it down and glue it down, right? So I don't have that luxury because it's not safe to laser epoxy. Just because of the fumes it emits. But this was a trade-off because I wanted this look of the island sitting on top of the water. The way that I thought to do it is to take the cutout and use this, set this on the epoxy, and then literally just create a puzzle and lay these pieces back on top, glue them down, glue them down, and then once I'm done, I can just lift this piece off, and I should have the correct layout. I really like this size. I think it'll look good on that map. I'm trying to fit basically a 7x10 area. One thing I don't like though is these burn marks, and I'm going to use some masking tape. Alright, after about 4 hours of struggling to get these files into the laser program, it was just Illustrator, and I was using snazzy maps. I reached out for some help to some friends that's more familiar with this stuff. Finally was able to get the layers properly laid out. The laser has about an hour cut time, so fingers crossed, turns out. So here's the design I'm going for. I found it on Walmart.com. It gives a lot of dimensions, but you kind of have to decipher them and figure them out. And I will end up changing some of them along the way, I'm sure. All right, the first step of this whole project is to get my plywood broken down and my poplar broken down. I'm using the plywood for the base, kind of the carcasses, and I'm going to use poplar for the tabletops. Alright, I wanted to show you this real quick. I've got the side panels here. I'm going to be drilling my pocket holes in the bottom and the top. But I've got this set up. I think drilling, I'm going to put 4 pocket holes in the top and the bottom on each side. Alright, I started breaking down the plywood for the drawers. There's going to be a total of 3 drawers. 2 that are the same size and then 1 deeper one on the bottom. And this is the plywood for the 2 smaller ones. So one thing that I've usually done is I'll put a dado in the bottom and then I would slide the drawer bottom in, so it was I don't use fasteners, it's just kind of a friction fit, and then you'd put the front on there and you'd have a drawer bottom. But this time I chose I'm just gonna staple or finish nails that luan to the bottom. I'll probably put a little bead of glue around the edge and then just nail it in. Entirely a preference thing. Okay, to this point, I started installing these drawer slides. These are full extension drawer slides. I went to install the first drawer. So the drawer will sit in here like this. The space between the drawer slides and the drawer is too much. I've got about probably a 1/4 inch too much. So what'll happen if I attach them to the drawers, they'll pinch in and the drawer won't slide freely. So what I'm going to do, rather than building this carcass all over again, I'm going to take some of this 1/4 inch material and put it on either one side. I'm going to try one side, and that way the drawer slides will mount and it'll take up that gap. Alright, I just got done making these drawer fronts. I got a spacer here. So this spacer is the same width as my feet. So I know I can set it on top of it like this. And I just got to make sure I line up the outsides. The positioning isn't exactly the way I wanted. I should have thought a little farther ahead. I should have moved these 2 smaller drawers up, and then I would have had a larger overhang right here. To attach these drawer fronts, I'm going to use glue and brads just to get it in place, and then I'll run some screws from the inside also to reinforce it. Okay, so these 2 towers here, the one on the right and the one on the left, have to be the same height in order for the desktop to be the same height. Basically everything will be exactly the same on this other one. So the heights are the same. So I'm going to use the same feet. Obviously we're using the same plywood, 3/4 inch. So if I cut the height of the vertical panel pieces at 25.5, everything should be the same height. Because then we'll have the other piece that comes and sets on the top, which I'll show you later, and then the desktop will sit on top. So there's going to be a middle shelf that goes in between these, and I intentionally waited to cut that one to final length, just so I could take the measurement. Anytime I can take the real measurement rather than assume it's going to be a little bit, I always get a better fit. All right, I'm gonna use a quick, easy trick. So this shelf right here, it's big, is gonna go in between here. The bottom of the shelf is gonna sit at 15 inches. So instead of marking these and trying to hold it up there and all that, I'm gonna create these spacers. I'm gonna cut them down to 15 inches, and then I'm gonna set them in place, and then all we have to do is set this shelf on top of it while we screw them in. All right, so both of the pieces are assembled. Now, the only thing left to do is the finishing process. That's gonna involve sanding, filling some voids with wood putty, but also using this walnut veneer, glue-on edge banding. Now, this is what I have on hand, and I'm gonna stain it walnut anyways. So I'm not sure what this is gonna look like. It's probably gonna look darker. The edges will look darker than the plywood, will be my guess, but I think it could be a cool accent. So we'll see how this turns out. Okay, so this is the back, and I just tested a small area. I went with this, let's call it a white wood plywood, and I didn't know how it was gonna stain, but it was like 20 bucks cheaper than the other stuff I was gonna use. So this is what I decided on. This is the back side, what does not have any edge banding. And so these edges, I knew they were gonna look that way, that's fine. What I'm really concerned about is how the stain looks on this white wood plywood. Really does not look that good. This stuff is better to be painted. So that is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna paint the base. All right, so the top is ready for stain, and this is what I'm gonna use. So different than what I've done in the past, usually I'm using an oil-based stain. This time I'm using a water-based stain. So I'm gonna pre-stain this poplar. It's a good idea to pre-stain any woods, any soft woods that you're staining. So this will help with just a nice even coat of color, and will reduce blotchiness and stuff like that. So I'll do this first, and then I'm gonna use this navy semi-transparent wood stain, again water-based. If you are gonna use a pre-stain, make sure there are specific pre-stains for water-based and specific pre-stains for oil-based stains. The other side I did halves, but obviously I don't think that's what the middle spot was for though. That was random. I don't know if I didn't get good coverage on the pre-stain and I like missed a square. But this stuff, I've already stirred it. I mean, look at the consistency.
It looks like paint.
Yeah. So do you think I should?
You need me on one side.
Do you think I should work in halves? You should just do one wipe the whole way down
Yeah.
with a rag.
Yeah. What were you using?
Rag.
Oh, yeah. For easier access, do you want to move it to the edge? So you're just walking the edge as opposed to having to walk all the way around the table?
Yeah, that works.
It'll save you some time.
I think it went okay the first time on the first side.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know what happened in that middle spot.
My guess is there's just something on it or a lack of something on it.
Yeah, really weird. But that's why you have two sides. All right, everything is prepped, sanded, ready to get the final coat of finish. For that, I'm going to be using polyacrylic, water-based finish. I've got to take everything upstairs. I'm going to spray in my garage. So I've had this idea for a while now, and this is the fun of making to me, is having an idea and just going for it. So it's Saturday morning, woke up, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna do this today. So I went out to the internet and got a SVG file of a hatchet. I'm gonna need 8 pieces. So the 2 outside pieces, I wanna put my logo on. I think that would look cool. So 6 pieces will be exactly the same. They'll all be sandwiched together. And then the 2 outside pieces, I'll have to manipulate them and to get my logo to show up the way I want to. So this is the material I'm going to use. This is just some stock 1/8 inch plywood. So got this off Amazon. I'll link it down in the description. Alright, now that I've got all these pieces, individual pieces cut, the next step is to glue all these together and clamp them together, and then we can start shaping it and molding them. right, so I just got this thing out of the clamps. Pretty sweet. It's kind of heavy, honestly. It's heavier than you think it would be, but I'm super pumped about this. So I'm going to take it over to the router table and use a flush trim bit to trim all these edges flush with each other. And then I'm going to take a round over bit and round over this handle, make sure it's nice and smooth. Okay, we got everything rough sanded. We got everything rounded over. The plywood held together better than I thought it was going to. So I'm encouraged about the blade tip and how it's going to handle. I had to use that mini bandsaw to get into some of these cracks. And I've just got some hand sanding now where the round over bit couldn't get in there. All right, so the next thing to do is to get some sort of blade on this thing. That's crazy. I mean, that's pretty sharp. I might switch off to some 400 grit paper and just try to refine it a little bit, but that I'm very happy with that. Can't let the pineapple go to waste. Snowy pineapple. It's actually really good. All right, we're gonna take this green flat off. Ready?
Ready.
So it's not strong enough to cut wood, but I mean, it's not bad. I've had an order of 24 maple trays come in. These are 7-inch trays. These are going to a specific retailer. 24 of them is the number that we can fit in a flat rate box. These are 10-foot boards of maple. Purchased them already planed down. Obviously I pay more for this. So that's the first step, is to break these down into 24-inch sections, and then we will go over the layout over at the CNC. So this is where I start every order. So this is you can see my layout on my bed. So I've got these 24-inch sections. I've got 3 trays being made out of each 24-inch section. These boxes represent the boards. So what I do is I measure the width of the boards. So if it's 7 inches, I'll change the height of these boxes to all 7 inches. And then what I'll do is I'll center all my trays on that 7 inches. It's important to center them because if you want the wiggle room. You don't want to be right up against the edge,
because what will happen is this setup might be right, but if your height measurements are off, these trays could be off one side or the other of your stock. So it's really important to plan ahead of time and make sure these are accurate and leave yourself some wiggle room on either side. Okay, so with this stock width, I can only fit 4 boards on my CNC bed because the max is 30 inches. So it looks like I'll get 12 trays out of this one run. It looks like this will take about 3 hours to complete at the feeds and speeds. One thing I'll note is I run 2 passes. So I'll run a roughing pass and then I'll run a finish pass. The roughing pass will have larger step over, can remove material quicker, but it doesn't leave the nicest finish. And I'll come back with the finishing pass with a lower step over and get a nice smooth finish and literally have minimal sanding. We're ready to start. And I know I said approximately 3 hours, but actually Carbide Motion is saying just over 2 hours to complete all 3 of these tool paths. Let's get started. All right, so here is where we're at in the process. We basically got everything rough sanded to this point. So you saw me take them from the CNC to the bandsaw to cut out the tabs, and if the end mill didn't cut all the way through, which that has to do with my wasteboard being on level and it really needs to be replaced. But it's not a big deal to me because I've got to cut the tabs off anyway. So I just take them off of the bandsaw, zip them off. If you can see here, the flush trim bit does a fantastic job having a good flush trim bit. So that's why I don't worry about it not cutting all the way through, because I know I have to use the flush trim anyways. So if you notice, I haven't done any sanding to this point on this tray, and that is attributed to the tight step over pass, which gets it super clean, and then the outside, the flush trim bit, really taking your time. You saw me do this way and then flip it over and do it this way, and it's such a clean finish. So the next step is to take it over to the sander with some 220 grit sandpaper, touch up these corners a little bit and any imperfections. Once we do that, it's all about applying the finish. Okay, there's a little bit of a scenario here I want to explain or show you. So I've got a tray here, everything is perfectly fine, perfectly sanded, but it's got a bar conclusion here that has a little bit of a crack. Well, I need to fill that crack. So what I do is I take some brown CA glue and I fill that crack. Now you want to be careful not to get too overfilled because you have to sand this smooth. So I just want to fill the crack and then sand it smooth. Sanding this concave area is kind of tricky
because you can't get a lot of tools in there. What I found the best combination to get this smooth is hand sanding and some sanding stars over on the drill press. All right, I'm out here in the garage. This is where I apply all my finishes. Now, I live in a part of the country here in Kentucky where it's not super cold, but it does get cold. So this is what I've come up with my setup after a bunch of trial and error. I've got my propane heater that I run ahead of time. That's obviously for safety precautions. I remove it when I'm actually applying the finish. We don't want any accidents here. You'll see my carbon monoxide detector here in the garage also. So I've taken all precautions to do this safely with the propane heater inside the garage. So I've heated the temperature up. You'll see it's 75 degrees. And that's important because we want the finish to dry properly and cure properly. So I've tried a few different application methods before this, and what I've settled on, the best finish for this application, for these trays, what looks the best, what holds up the best, is spray lacquer. Now, you might be asking why I don't use a spray gun. You've seen me use a spray gun to apply finish before. And although I've done that in the past, I'm not 100% comfortable yet with that application method and getting good results. So I know I can get good results with this, a little more expensive, but it is worth the extra money to me to get a guaranteed result. So I'll be applying 3 coats of this, and I do not have to sand between. All right, that is my process. So on the grayscale images, what are some areas that we like, geographical areas? So like for the rock, we would use, I guess we could pick a place in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, I do the Rocky Mountains just for fun. The desert, we can pull something from Arizona.
I think painting them afterwards, the appropriate color, is really what will kind of pull it all together. Just got it off the CNC. Now we haven't decided entirely what material we're going to use yet, but MDF is what we used for the prototype. So we're super happy with this. We're using a combination of grayscale images, Photoshop, and Carbide Create to really get to this point. And it's been a lot of trial and error. A few hours of trial and error.
So after cutting it out, you can see that this part right here, where it's like pure black at the edges,
yeah,
is fine. But if we zoom in on this corner over here, we can see there was only a slight little line of black there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the tool is not small enough to fit where that line was.
It'll make more sense later, but this game piece is going to slide into a slot. But in some other areas where the topography is a little bit different, we need to get a little more aggressive, just so everything blends together, and then we're able to use or see the roads. Usually painting MDF is an easy thing, but after you machine it, it gets really hairy, and we took a wire brush to this and tried to clean it up with a little bit of sandpaper too, and we're just not happy with how it paints after it's been machined. So the next prototype is going to have a little more aggressive on the edge blending, and then we're going to use pine to see how that works, and I think it'll turn out a little bit better. Here's the second prototype with some built-in tests. We're really trying to figure out this grayscale stuff as far as depths of cut. It's really weird trying to figure out what color means what depth, and it's really relative. It's not like black equals 1/4 of an inch or white equals 1/2 inch or anything like that. It's all depends on the model and the data that's in there and the comparison between the two of them. So this is what we got on the second one. I increased the step over just to get it done faster. This took about 1/2 hour to carve out. Pine is the way to go for painting them. So pine over MDF, we learned that. We learned a couple things that doesn't work, and we're working on those right now. One of the main reasons why is we did a test right here, which this was white and this was black, and this black wasn't supposed to cut all the way through because we put an 1/8 inch base on this, so there should have been an 1/8 inch remaining, but for some reason it cut all the way through, and the white was left untouched, which in theory should be the case. So on to prototype number 3. So I'm going to attempt to explain what we have going on here as far as what we're looking at the files. So we haven't cut this file yet. This is the rock tile, and we just imported the black and white image. So this is the image we're importing from Photoshop with the different shades of gray. And then Carbide, so this is the pro version of Carbide Create. I don't think you can do this in the free version. But what it does is it takes that grayscale and makes a 3D almost rendering of it. So this is what our cutout will look like. And we can play with the height, which is basically the, let's just simplify it, it's the how dramatic the inclines are and how steep everything is. And then the base height is just a fixed dimension that adds a base to the layer. And so that's our 1/8. So everything slopes down to a 1/8 inch, and that's what we were trying to figure out with our gray scales. What color gray, or white or black, is 1/8 of an inch when you're using 3/4 inch material. So we'll set up the tool paths and we'll get ready to cut it. The third prototype just finished up, and here it is. We're really happy with this. We've gone through 7 different layouts, digital layouts, and this is our third actual cut. So a lot of trial and error, we spent most of the day on these 3 prototypes. So the really cool thing about these pieces is this is actual topographical data from different national parks that kind of fit the, I guess, resource if you know the game. So trees are Olympic National Park, the mountains, so it's actually in the game, it's ore or stone, is the Rocky Mountain National Park. The sheep or wool in the game, we chose the Smoky Mountain National Park for that, because there's kind of a lot of livestock in that area, so that's why we chose that one. For brick, we chose the topographical data from the Grand Canyon. For the desert, came from Death Valley National Park. And then the final one, which was kind of difficult, was fields or wheat. I wanted to pick the heartland of the United States, so we went with the Badlands National Park for this data, because it's kind of close to Nebraska, and I know it's in South Dakota, but it's kind of in Nebraska, and corn and wheat and that type of stuff. Just go with it. I'll leave a link down in the description to that also, of where the website we pulled that information from. All right, we're on to day 2 of this project. Yesterday we spent 6, 7, 8 hours prototyping and learning how to really blend in these colors. And here you can see what I'm talking about. We actually did a test on different color percentages in Photoshop and how deep they would cut on our 3/4 inch material. Now, the 3/4 inch material is important because these depths aren't incremental across all thicknesses. The scale moves based on the material size. So now it's just back and forth, really dialing the designs and making sure we get the colors right in Photoshop, the right tint of grayscale, to get it to cut the way we want to. Here is our first sheep piece, actual game piece. So we've got some hedges in here, we've got some sheep, and we've got some texture. So that turned out pretty cool. We're excited about this. So now it's going to be rinse and repeat. We finally got to the point where our design is good, our production is good. There are a total of 19
tile pieces that we need to make that will make up this game board. So let's get machining. Alright, so we've been machining these pieces, honestly, for a couple days now. This is the third day that we've been working on this project, and so a lot of effort has gone into this. So these aren't cleaned up at all. These are just straight off the CNC, and this is the mountain piece, which we're extremely happy with. This is the field, and these are going to be painted, so this is just raw wood right now. There's a really big difference when it comes to machining between these two pieces. The roughing pass to remove the unneeded material is done with a 1/4 inch end mill on both of these pieces. Now I used a downcut end mill, but you could use an upcut just as well. That really doesn't make a difference in this scenario. Now the difference between these two in machining is the finishing or 3D cut. This is done with a 1/16 inch ball end mill, and this is done with an 1/8 inch ball end mill. Now with a 1/16 inch ball end mill, you can get into a lot tighter areas. I just flipped you off, sorry. But you can get into a lot more detail. I don't know if you can see that. This one, we had more detail on it. We actually had rows of wheat in these areas, and that 1/8 inch just can't get down into those crevices. We're okay with that because the machine time on this piece was like an hour and a half. Machine time on this piece was like a half an hour. And so, big machine time difference. Yesterday we learned that even though we were speeding up our cut rates and everything, we just weren't making much progress because there's so much detail in this. The machine can only run so fast. The thing that's taking so long on these is our step over. So on that finishing pass, we run a really tight step over. Like I'm running it at about 5 thousandths right now. That gives us a really nice finish, but it takes a long time. So all we've got left is the forest to do. So we've got 4 pieces left. While I've been trying to figure out all these tool paths and machining things going on over here and trying to get these pieces done, John Mark has been prepping the files for the game board and to be cut on the laser. That'll be a lot more efficient and clean, and we'll assemble it all at the end. You'll see what it looks like. But these have taken a long time, and the design work has taken a long time. The good thing is that it's replicable. So I'm going to make these files available on my website, and I'll put a link in the description to them. It might be a little while because I want to clean them up and make them user-friendly for everybody. Yeah, so this is going to be on the bottom layer?
This will be the top layer.
Top layer. Okay.
So this will be the top layer. This is the etching for the top layer. Then we're going to come back and we're going to cut hexagons out of these shapes so that the hexagons actually line up with all of those.
Okay, so just like the tiles, the pieces will drop in.
Pieces will drop in on all of those. So then it will come back in and we'll cut the outside edge all the way around after we do the engraving part.
We cut it in 2 layers, and that way the tiles have something to sit into and are secure. I'm using CA glue to do this. Really simple, quick, but the key here is to get the alignment correct. If we don't get the alignment correct, once we glue it, things could get messy, and we want everything to be perfectly aligned and snapped together. We started off with spray paint, and my goal was to layer it from with darks and lights. This is the rock tile, and so what I did was I got the black down in the kind of the valleys and then lightened it up a little bit with some primer, actually some gray primer, to get this really cool looking rock tile. Now what I'm going to do with the trees is, here's the base color of the tree with spray paint. So this is all spray paint, and what I did was I did black in the valleys again, and then I went heavy green everywhere else. Now it's a little darker than I want it to be, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush here with some acrylic paint and just kind of get the tips of the bristles a tiny bit wet. Like, we're not even painting, we just want to shade it. Just to hit these tips. So this is what it looks like before, and this is what it looks like after. So I'm going to do that to the rest of these forest, and then I'm going to move on to some of the other ones. On this one, I have to paint the sheep. We're going to do that white. These little things are sheep. Alright, I got all the game pieces here that I just 3D printed. Because of our game board layout, I had to, and because of these files that I purchased, have these really tiny pieces. And so what I did was, instead of just editing this file, which was hard to do, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to make a small little cylinder that is a 1/2 inch tall. And so our cities and settlements are going to be glued together in 2 pieces, like this. And that way the 3D terrain doesn't get in the way of the piece, and it's not sitting down so far. So this will just give it a little bit of a lift and make it look good. And then I need to paint all these parts to the game colors that they're going to be, and these will be finished. It was super cool to get together with friends and play the game that we recreated.
Yeah, right here.
Oh, that's me.
You
Two
get
of
2.
them. I get 3 wheats.
This was our first time play testing the game, and honestly, 95% of everything that we did worked out the way we thought it was going to. One thing we need to do is we need to make the spots where the numbers sit on top of the game tiles a little bit bigger. Some of them fit and some of them didn't. I'm not sure if that was a laser dimensioning or a design layout, but just that small tweak will get those tokens to sit in place. So here's our overall design. This is the sketch that my wife made. I told her to come up with something that she wanted, and then I went through and kind of broke things down a little bit more, trying to wrap my mind around the construction. So the first thing to do is to build these outside panels, which are going to be the leg assemblies. The materials for this project are going to be 8 1x3s. We're going to use those for the structural support, you'll see here in a second, and then 1/2 inch plywood. That is what the main carcass of this whole thing is going to be made out of. The drawers are going to be made out of 1/2 inch ply. The top is going to be made out of a prefabbed wood slab. And that's just because we found that it was the most cost-effective way to do the top right now with lumber prices the way they currently are. So let's get right into this build. But you always want to take off the factory end because it's been beat up and thrown around. So I always take just a little bit off, and that way you have a nice clean edge. Alright, so here are the 4 legs cut to 38 inches long. The next step I'm going to do is 2 of these, which are going to be the back legs, are going to have rabbets in the back so it can accept a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. Alright, so now we've got our side panel pieces all cut to size. These legs are 38 inches long, and these panels that sit in between here are 36 inches long. The reason for that is that'll give us a leg. So the way we're going to attach these 2 pieces is by drilling some pocket holes with my Craig 520. Really big fan of this pocket hole jig, and I think it'll be great on this project also. this is how our outside is going to look. It's going to be pressed in like this. We're going to have this inset right here. Now, to get this a nice framed look, we're going to add some of the same leg material. Obviously, the thickness of the plywood creates an offset here. All right, so over here at the bandsaw, the way I'm going to set this up is I'm going to put this piece right here, bring it over my fence, because now what I'll do, pull this out, now I can rub my piece through here. It's like we're like a 1/16 of an inch off. Not much, but what I'll do is I'll move that fence out just a little bit, just so I can get this nice and flush right here. I'm using these, the cutoffs you just saw me cut. Since they give me the perfect height, I can set them on there. When I push everything flat, we want it to be flush on this back side, so we have that inset I was talking about on the front side. And I just have to make sure the orientation on the legs are right, because I've got this rabbit, if you remember me cutting, and it has to be facing out in the back. All right, so now it's time to get this bottom constructed. It's going to be constructed pretty much the same way as the sides, so I'm not going to take the time to re-show you that. I'm going to do that real quick, and then we're going to assemble the two legs in the bottom. So here is the base. Now you see the only difference from the sides that I showed you to this is these are perpendicular instead of parallel with the plywood. And that is because this is my front trim and this is my back trim. Now it is time to assemble the sides and the base, and then the stretchers that will attach the top. Alright, so we got the main carcass built. Now it's time to put in this dividing shelf that will divide the drawers just from some open storage on this side. Now we went back and forth on what the best way to do this is and how we have built it up to this point. We attached our front trim to this divider, and then we attached a kind of a stretcher from front to back on the top of the trim. Instead of taking the plywood and making angles so it went up inside of these stretchers, we took the opportunity to do that. So it's going to work out well. Alright, so we've got the main structure done, and now it's time to figure out these drawers. So I did all these calculations, and my side pieces are going to be my long pieces. They're going to cover up the end grain of the plywood back. So the back is going to be inside the outside pieces. We're going to be using pocket holes and screws on the back side to hide them. And then this front piece, the front face of the drawer frame, is going to actually be pine. And that's because that is going to be stained. That's the look that we're going for. And this will be attached on the inside using pocket holes also. I'm going to repurpose this 1/2-inch ply that I just tore down. This was an old like bookshelf display case thing. Rather than just using new plywood, I'm going to repurpose this old plywood. I've got them all leveled up here on the end, and I should be able, I marked the top one at 16, so I should be able to make them all in one cut. That way they're all the same length. Alright, so I've got all my sides and backs cut. Before I get too far ahead of myself and forget, I want to put those slots or dados in where the drawer bottoms are going to slide into. I'm going to use my table saw blade to make those cuts. And my table saw blade is the kerf of the blade is an eighth of an inch. And the plywood I'm going to use is also an eighth of an inch. So it'll match up perfectly. You'll see how all that works in here in a second. But in order to make those cuts, I've had to remove the blade guard and my riving knife from my table saw. All of my material is 10 inches wide, so I can set this up once and all of them will line up perfectly. So I should have done this before, but I wanted to check to see if my dado will work. And this material is a little bit bigger than the width of my blade, so what I'm going to do, I keep calling this 1/8 inch. This is probably more like 1/4 inch. That's what it is. That's why it's off. So forget everything I said about the measurements. My blade kerf is an 1/8 of an inch, and this plywood is a 1/4 of an inch. So technically I have to make 2 passes. The wood that we're going to use for the fronts or the faces of the drawers are going to be made out of this piece of pine that we are repurposing from the closet renovation that we just did. If you haven't seen that video, I'll link it up above. You can go check out the closet. These pine drawer fronts, we want in the front drawer face there to be a place where you can grab and pull the drawer out. There's not going to be any drawer knobs or anything like that. So this is what we're going for. It looks like this, and so we want to mirror that on these drawer fronts. You could do it a number of different ways, but I think the best way for this case, in our case, is this is a piece of just pine, primed pine, cut off, doesn't matter. But we are going to make a template for the 3 drawer fronts. And the reason we're going to make a template, if we did all 3 of them individually, we could end up with 3 different results. Looks really good. So now what we can do is we can take our template here. So we line it up and I'll trace my shape on like that. So now we have our contour, and I'll take it over to the bandsaw and I'll remove all of this waste just like I did on the template. Leave about 1/4 of an inch. And this is where the consistency comes in, because we'll put this back here and then we'll take a flush trim bit. That's why we have to remove this waste, so our bearing can touch this and ride along this contour and it will trim this shape. We just got done cutting all these 2x4s to length, and then we also put all the pocket holes that are going to join all these boards together. To drill all the pocket holes, traditionally I would use my old pocket hole jig, which is the K4 system, where you would have to stand this board on end, maybe clear the ceiling, but we did something different this time. Craig just came out with this new 520 Pro, rather than doing that traditional on end, I was able to slide this on, clamp it down, and drill our holes. The way I like to think about it is this is taking the jig to the board rather than taking the board to the jig. The next step is to join all these pieces together. We're going to be using 2.5 inch Craig jig screws. Now, where we're at is there's going to be some pieces that go across here, just like everything else. But we've got to put our plywood decking in first. So here in the corners, we're going to add some triangle bracing. And the main reason for that is where the CNC feet are. So the weight will be here in the corner. And I want to build this thing as rigid as possible because I don't want it to move. There's a lot of forces with the CNC when it's operating, and the last thing you want is your CNC enclosure to wobble at all because that decreases your tool accuracy. So now it's time to think about how we're going to attach this plywood to the bracing. Now, we didn't give much thought to this beforehand because we weren't sure where the bracing exactly was going to land. We knew how we were going to brace it, but now that we can see it, it would look a lot cleaner to attach the plywood using pocket holes through this bracing and screwing up into this plywood up above. We'll have to do this from the other side because of the angle. I'll take you up top and show you how we're going to do it. So this clamp, or this jig, is going to, because of the angle that we have to drill these holes, we have to flip it like this. Flips on, tighten it. That's all. I've already got it set up to 1.5 inches because that's our material thickness. So we've got the plywood in. It's really sturdy. This thing is coming along really good. Now it's time to put the back and kind of let's call it the concrete side because these two sides are going to be different than the other two. I'll explain that here in a second. For the back and the concrete side, we're going to use this quarter inch material. We are going to be attaching it with these 5/8 inch brad nails, which I love these little things, and using our brad nailer obviously to do that. So there'll be a bunch of them back here. Again, it'll be really easy to pop off if we ever want to change it out or add anything to it. Nice. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Fit. One, two, three. All right, got both feet on there. Let's keep going. Lift. It's under. Did I get your hand? I'm good. Did it get you? Nope, I'm good. All right. So now that we have the majority of the construction done, it's time to work on electric and dust collection. Now these kind of have to be plumbed in, so to speak. And so what we've done is we went ahead, before we put this outside panel on, just for accessibility, we added 2 power strips, one for each machine. So each machine is independently ran to power, and then it's all plugged in back here at the outlet. So what we can do is we can turn each one on individually. So that's going to be really nice. We got everything buttoned up really nice. And the other thing is dust collection. All right, so our dust collection comes in on the back corner and on each level here. And what's going to happen is all of our main piping, our 4-inch piping, we're using what was here before, and we've got it running to the back of the entire carcass of this thing. So the pipes come in, and then we're going to use this flexible hose to go over, and then this is going to be ran to each boot. So just like electrical, everything is ran independently, so these levels can be run together or separately. So if you remember a few months back, I built this wood wall as a backdrop for filming purposes. So I built that entire wall not knowing I was going to build a double-decker CNC enclosure. So a way that we figured out to repurpose this wall behind here is we took all of the boards off the wall behind the CNC enclosure, and we're going to repurpose them and put them on this side of the enclosure. And what that's going to do is we're going to film. It'll give us a corner that we can film in, still utilizing this wood, still giving the wood wall vibe, and still having the CNC enclosure. So now it's time to figure out the doors for the enclosure. I went back and forth on a couple different ideas. One idea was to do kind of like an oven where the doors folded towards you and down and just kind of hung down. I like that mainly because of the amount of space that it takes, and they kind of hang down out of the way rather than opening up and, you know, hanging off the edges, I guess. There's just pros and cons of both of them. But what I decided to do was to do traditional doors that will open up from the center out. And the reason I chose to do that was the materials that I'm going to use. Now, building one big door like an oven with these 1x3s and the acrylic that I'm going to use. So acrylic is kind of expensive, so I wanted to use thin acrylic, 1/8 inch, so I can see in. But it doesn't really have much rigidity over a 5-foot gap. It kind of flops. And these 1x3s, although it hold the edge, it's not going to be rigid enough to serve as a door. So what I decided to do is make traditional doors that will open from the middle. That way I can build 4 frames and use smaller pieces of acrylic, and that way they'll be a lot more rigid. This was a massive upgrade to my CNC operation. Not only did I add another CNC, but I also gained more dust control. It's quieter in the shop, and ultimately that's why I decided to go with an enclosure.
If a client approached you about building 6 feet tall letters and their logo, but they needed it delivered 2 hours away in 3 weeks, what would you say? Well, like anyone would say, what's your budget? Am I right? Assuming the budget was adequate, would you say yes? Well, I did, and this is how I built it. Here is the scope of the job. To create 6 foot tall, 18-inch thick letters that would be used for a conference. They'd be sat outside the entrance of the convention center for people to walk by and take pictures with. They need to be able to sit out in the rain, used year after year, and painted white so they can have light projected on them and make them look different colors. Also, they wanted their logo built with the same specifications, except it needed to be 6 feet wide as well as tall. Everything needed to look the same from all sides, so no front or back. For example, no backer board on the logo. I paid my friend Jeremy, who is a fantastic woodworker, to work out of my shop for a day. Check out Burke Country Custom on Facebook to see more of his amazing work. This was money well spent because it gave me a big jump start on this project. It took the two of us an 8-hour day to fully construct the A, L, T, and to get started on the S. The A, L, and T were all constructed the same. We started by laying out and cutting the shape of each letter out of 3/4 inch plywood. We needed a front and back for each letter, so we stacked 2 sheets on top of each other and cut them both at the same time. My track saw came in clutch for this project, and what the track saw couldn't reach in the corners, we used a pull saw to finish the cut. Once we had the front and back of a letter, we ripped down the same 3/4 inch plywood into 15-inch widths. This would become the material used to connect the front and the back of each letter, giving us an overall depth or thickness of approximately 17.5. For assembly, we glued and screwed everything. We would lay one of the letter faces flat on the ground and started adding the side pieces. We used pocket holes to connect the first side, and then we pre-drilled and screwed through the face of the second side. All 3 of these letters went together pretty quickly, considering how large they were. Next up, the S. We started by laying out the overall shape. Big thanks to my wife for helping out and taking the lead on laying this out. She used a grid system to create points and then connected the points. I tried to make a 3-part stencil on my CNC, but it was more trouble than it was worth. However, it was handy to use one of the sections of it to trace the curves. After everything was laid out, I used the jigsaw and track saw to cut out the shape. For the construction of the S, we approached it the same way we did the L, A, and T. But what about those curves? Jeremy and I considered 2 techniques: kerf bending the plywood, making kerf cuts on one side and bending the plywood around the corner, or making a stencil of each corner and layering the plywood together where the edge grain would be pointed out. As you can see here, this is what we decided on. The reason we didn't do kerf bending is we didn't know if the thin material left behind after the kerf cut would hold up outdoors long term. So what we ended up with was 22 layers of 3/4 inch plywood. All 4 of the outside corners were the same. So we needed 88 of those layers, and then we needed a total of 88 layers to make the other 4 curves. That's a total of 172 total layers to make all these corners. I cut every single one of them out on the bandsaw, but I found that gluing 5 or 6 layers of plywood together and making one cut was a lot faster.
So I attached these corners to the face, and just like all the other letters, I used 3/4 inch plywood to connect all them together. One thing I had to do was square all the ends of the curved sections so the plywood between had something straight to screw to. I did this using my miter saw, which was kind of sketchy, but it worked. I also added some 2x4 supports to the interior of the S. Not sure if it was needed or not in the end, but it made me feel better. I filled in all the cracks and voids with wood filler as I went along. From this point, it was a lot of filling and sanding to get everything prepared to be painted. Since these are going to be outside for 1 week out of the year, I painted them with 3 coats of exterior paint. The last component to finish this build was the logo. I built this in 4 sections using the same technique as I did on the letters. The tricky part with this one was how it would come together structurally. We came up with the idea to use this blocking that was painted black so it disappears from the rest of the logo. This was the main structural support to this piece. Then we used L brackets to connect the tops and bottoms together. L brackets come in 90 degrees typically, but we needed them to be more like 135 degrees. So I heated them up with a torch and bent them until they matched the angle we needed. This logo ended up being a lot more rigid than I thought it was going to be and ended up working out great. So if you're curious, this is the total materials and labor it took to pull this build off. We used a total of 19 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, 3 gallons of paint, 3 pounds of wood filler, 1 gallon of wood glue, hundreds of screws, a U-Haul rental, and a total of about 80 hours of labor. After everything had its final coat of paint, it was time to deliver. Don't they look great in their final location? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next thing I'm building. These builds seem to come out of nowhere, and I'm always up for a challenge, so you never know what's next. I rarely even know what's next, but isn't that the fun of it? This is the biggest Andy Bird Builds project to date, and I couldn't have done it alone. Thanks to Jeremy, Carson, Kenny, Bao, John Mark, and most of all, my wife, for helping and letting this project take over our lives and house for over a week. So a couple months ago when we came up with this idea, I started brainstorming how I would actually pull that off. So from concept in my brain to something that lives in the real world, this is the process of how I did it. I started this project like I start most others, by putting pencil to paper. The first sketch isn't exact, it's merely to get the idea out of my head so I can visualize it. After getting a rough idea, I started thinking about overall dimensions, what materials I was going to use, and what limitations I would come across along the way. In this case, I knew that my CNC bed, which is 33 inches by 33 inches, was going to impact the overall dimensions of the headboard. Also, being a headboard on a king-size bed, I needed to know the width of the bed, which, come to find out, was 76 inches. Ultimately, this is the information that decided the overall dimensions of 30 inches tall by 84 inches wide. After this, I started designing in a program called Fusion 360, which is a CAD/CAM software. I refined the design and dimensions as I went until I got something that I liked, and let's be honest, something that my wife approved of also. Once I had the design 100% finished, I divided the headboard into 3 28-inch sections. This way, I could fit it on my CNC bed comfortably. With my 3 parts, I moved to the CAM portion of Fusion 360. This is where I set up and generated the tool paths for my CNC router to cut. That is a really quick overview of the design work. If you have any questions about the design work, drop them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Alright, so I've got everything set up. I'm ready to do my first test. I spent a lot of time designing this, so I'm hopeful that everything will go well, but I really want to do a test to learn what I have to tweak. I'm kind of expecting that I'm going to have to tweak some things. One thing that I know is I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch down cut bit. So the down cut bit is going to be pushing all the fibers and ejecting everything that it cuts downward. What that does, it'll leave me a nice smooth top surface, and since I am cutting all the way through, the back will be a little rough, but I'll just clean it up with a sanding block and it won't be that big of a deal. But my desired front surface is really the point here. I could use a compression bit, but rather than deal with it, I want to guarantee that I have a nice smooth front surface, because that's what we're going to see. Everything else is going to be hidden. So let's see what else we learn here. I let it go. I shut it down about halfway through the tool path. For some reason, which I'll have to specify this in Fusion, but I didn't catch that it did like 3 of the circles first, and then it did the outside contour path. And so even though I have tabs on these ends here, it still cut it loose without getting all the circles cut. So I wanted to cut the circles first and then come back lastly and do this. And maybe I need to add a few more tabs along the end. Other than that, it cut through really well. I did 1/4 inch depth of cut. So this is 1/2 inch material, which is like 0.47 or something like that. So we did it in 2 passes, which the Shapeoko Pro handles that really well. Cutting at 100 inches per minute at 0.25 inches per cut. So I'm gonna go make that change. Other than the issue that I told you about, I think everything is gonna turn out good. I think I learned everything I need to. All right, so for this project, I'm gonna be using this 1/2 inch material. I just got this from my local home store. Not cheap these days. I paid $260 for 3 1/2 inch 4x8 sheets, but that was with tax, so I've got that going for me. Anyways, this is a high grade birched veneered plywood. So we needed something that was higher grade because I'm gonna stain it. So if I was gonna paint it, I could pay a lot less, well, a lot less for plywood because it's gonna be covered. But here I wanted something where the grain looks good, it's gonna take a stain well. So that's why I went with this pretty plywood. All right, so I got all my cut marks laid out, and it hit me. Why don't I cut all 3 of my sheets at the same time, only having to lay out and mark one of them? So instead of cutting just 1 sheet at a time, I'm going to cut all 3 of them at the same time. One thing that I did here, I left 2 inches on each side. It's bigger than what my end product's going to be. So rather than cut these to the exact size and then use the CNC to cut out the circles and not cut the outside, I'm going to have the CNC cut the outside. That's for a couple reasons. One, it'll make sure every one of them is exactly consistent, and it eliminates the need to line them up perfectly every single time. So if I was to cut them myself, and even if they were all exactly the same size, if I laid them out 1/8 of an inch off, it's going to be, my holes aren't going to line up. They're going to be 1/8 of an inch off. So it's going to take a little bit more machining time, and I'm going to have to mess with tabs a little bit, but I would rather do that and have a greater end product. So that's what I'm going to do for this. All right, so I'm going to be using these screws. They're actually Craig pocket hole screws, but it's the only inch screw that I've got that has a decent top on it. So it's going to be in each corner. Now the way I set this up when I was talking about earlier with the 2 inches in each direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure up 1 inch, and then I'm going to measure 1 inch in, and that's going to be my 0 point. So I'm going to 0 to right there. So my file, the XYZ that you saw on the computer, is going to start right there. It's not going to start out here because I'm going to have these screws here. So the screws will be within that inch zone so they won't get hit. The other reason for this is the use of tabs. And so I want to, obviously I can't, like I was saying earlier, I can't cut all the way through to the edge because then it'll break loose like it did on my test. All this is to get the perfect pieces. I've got 9 of them to cut. I'm a little worried about going 9 for 9. There's probably going to be a mistake somewhere, but let's see if we can go 9 for 9 and cut out these panels and not have anything bad happen or I forget to do something. So let's see how this goes. All right, so I've got all the pieces almost cut out. I went 8 for 9, so I can only get 3 blanks of these out of each piece of plywood. I bought 3 pieces of plywood. So I got to the 8th of 9. I was cruising along, feeling good. Cut all these out. Cut all these pieces out. I was doing the outside contour toolpath. It got to the back corner, and somehow my dust hose, the bungee cord fell off, and it got hooked around my Z-axis and lost some steps. And anyways, it cut the corner short, as you can see right here. Not savable, and that meant I had to go get some more plywood. Anyways, this is what I needed, so I'll cut this last one, and that will be the 9th of 9 pieces, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. All right, I'm cutting this 3rd layer, just the centerpiece, in a couple different pieces. So you can see how, since the way I designed it, this 3rd layer is open down here. So there is no bars going across. That's just on the 1st and 2nd layer. So there's nothing right here connecting these 2 pieces. So from this point to this point is its own individual piece. It's going to be this thickness. So I'm just going to make that on the table saw. So I'm going to make one on the top and bottom, and then that will complete the look the way I have it designed. This is so cool. To go from concept in the brain to some sketches, lines, and boom, we've got this piece of art. I don't know what else to call it. But this headboard that's going to look really cool in our bedroom. And the next step, so CNCing is all done. We've got all 9 pieces here, and the next step is to stain them. So remember, that's why we went with a nice looking face for plywood, because there are a lot cheaper plywoods out there. But since it's going to be a transparent stain, you're going to see this wood grain. It's going to pull it out. What we're going to do is we're going to go from light to dark. It's going to kind of have this ombre effect from light, and then the backer board, which we have not added yet, just going to be an 1/8 inch piece of ply, is going to be the darkest. The face is going to be natural wood. That's going to be the darkest. I think that's going to look really cool. I have to experiment with some stain and mixing them to get kind of a gradual color. We'll start with a lighter stain and then probably add black to it to make it darker. All right, so I've already started testing out the stains and what color I want the layers to be. My wife will be proud of me. I went and changed my shirt so I don't get stain all over my nice clothes. Hey, 1 point for me. I've got a couple different color stains here. I've got Early American right here. This is Early American. The pre-stain I use basically reduces the blotchiness, and the color is more even. It does change the color of the stain, so that's important to remember. So I did the same thing here with the dark walnut stain. This is no pre-stain, and this is stain. So what I've come to here is the front face is going to be the lightest. I'm just going to use a clear coat finish on the front. It's just going to be natural wood. The second layer is going to be a little bit darker. I'm probably going to go with this Early American. The 3rd layer is going to be even a little more darker, and then the 4th layer, the backer board that I'm going to attach all these things together with, is going to be the darkest. Okay, so I've got layer 2 up here now. I'm going to apply this pre-stain like I talked about earlier to the whole surface, let it dry, and then I'll apply the Early American color to it. All right, so I let that soak in for about 5 minutes, and looks like I need to wipe off a couple spots that have any excess that it's not going to soak in at this point, and then I'm able to start applying the stain. All right, all the pieces are dry and laid together just to see the different colors. I haven't attached anything yet. One thing that I changed is I was going to use an 1/8 inch plywood as the backer board. The 1/8 inch plywood that I have isn't long enough, so I'm going to use the cutoffs from the plywood when I cut them down to size, and that way I have less waste. The only problem is it's going to be done in 2 pieces here, and which isn't a big deal. You won't be able to see it really, and I will stagger them so they're even. So while the stain is drying on those back panels, I turn my attention to the frame that's going to kind of frame out this whole piece. I decided to use 2x4s for this. I'm going to mill them down. I'm going to cut the rounded edge over, and the reason I decided to go with 2x4s is it's the cheapest solid wood that I can stain, and it just makes sense. So we're really close to the end of construction of this project, and then we'll just have to install, which will be a whole nother process in itself. But let's finish up this frame, get all the stain, get it to dry, and we will assemble this piece. Okay, what I decided on to assemble all this together, got all these pieces here, is to use some wood glue, light wood glue, and some CA glue, which is basically like super glue, and some accelerator, which makes it bond almost instantly. The CA glue will hold it in place while the wood glue is drying, and I think that is the best way to assemble. All right, everything is glued up in place. I have a little bit of unevenness here on the edge, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this flush trim bit on my router. I'll show you how it's going to work here, and just to trim everything flush, and that way I can put on this border. And then one thing I'm going to do, just to reassure everything, I'm going to flip it over now that I have everything in place and glued, and I'm going to run some screws in from the back. I just want to make sure everything stays nice and tight and in place, so I'll use a couple fasteners just to ensure that that happens. All right, so we're up here in the final destination where it's going to be installed. For installation on the wall, I'm going to be using these hanging brackets. I'm using 2 of them, and they hold 100 pounds apiece. This thing is under 100 pounds, so this is going to be plenty. So we need to make sure we do 2 things up here in installation. One, I want to make sure that at least 1 screw across that bracket is in a stud. And then the other ones are going to be in drywall anchors. The second thing we need to do is make sure it's centered on the wall. So in order to do this, what we did was we located studs on each side in the rough area where these brackets are going to be. Then we found the center of the wall, and we measured to those studs from the center of the wall. Once we had those measurements, we took those and put those on the back of our headboard and basically just transcribed them over to the headboard. Then we'll install the brackets, and if we did everything correctly, we should be able to hang this thing on the wall, and which with a few adjustments, be able to slide it back and forth and center it up on the bed. This was the largest CNC project I've ever tackled, from design concept in my head to reality, actual real world thing. So I hope that this process showed you that you can take an idea from your head and model it in 3D, cut it out in the CNC, and boom.
My son is getting to the age where he's starting to crawl and climb. So it's time to build him something he can practice these skills on. I mentioned that I was building a pickler to family and friends, and they expressed interest in having one as well. So here I go, building 3 picklers. 2 need to be completely assembled, and 1 is to be shipped as a flat pack. If you don't know what a pickler is, it's basically a climbing triangle for kids. It was developed by a Hungarian pediatrician, Dr. Emmy Pickler, over 100 years ago. The files that I made and am using for this project will be available if you want to make one yourself. I use Fusion 360 to design all the parts, and my Shapeoko CNC to cut them all out. Now I know this is extreme overkill when it comes to the tools you need to build this project. A drill and some sort of saw is all you really need to do this. So why use the CNC? Because I enjoy the ability to design something once and make all my measurements once and be able to repeat that process easily. So I started this project with a rough sketch on paper to figure out the rough dimensions. I wanted the picklers to be able to fold up as compact as possible for easy storage. I quickly realized I needed to make a couple prototypes to get the size and to refine the overall design. For the first prototype, I went with a leg length of 28 inches. This put the overall height when extended out into the triangle at like 24 inches. So the first thing I learned is that this was way too small. For the second prototype, I added 6 inches to the overall leg height, making the length of the legs 34 inches. The only issue with that was my CNC bed is only 33 by 33 inches. With prototype number 2 now complete, I did learn that I needed to tweak the hole spacing to get the rungs to line up on each side. I also learned I needed to make the inset portion on the leg a little larger so that the joint can move a little more freely. One thing I still needed to test was the hole size for the poplar dowel I'd be using. I got these 1-inch dowels from the home improvement store, and I was expecting there to be a little variance in each pole. So I did a hole diameter test. After testing these dowels, I decided to go with the hole size of 1.05. I didn't want to make the hole super tight either because I wanted room for wood glue. My plan was to make 1 pickler out of walnut, 1 pickler out of maple, and the last one out of pine. Yeah, I know. Whoever gets the pine one is my least favorite. I'm just kidding. I actually didn't end up using the pine or maple because I made too many mistakes. You'll see what I mean here in a second. So I'm starting with rough sawn lumber here, and I had to mill it all down to the right size. But pre-milled wood from the home improvement store or even plywood works just as well here. I loaded up the walnut to be the first one cut on the CNC. I needed a total of 4 legs and 2 triangle braces for each pickler. So I decided I'd cut 2 legs at a time on the CNC and do the triangles separately. I started out using an 1/8 inch downcut bit for everything. This would enable me to do everything without a tool change and give me a clean top surface. I quickly realized that the depth of the pockets for the rungs were too much for this bit. I was getting a lot of tool deflection when clearing these pockets. So I switched to a 1/4 inch upcut bit for these pockets. This left a slightly less desirable result at the top edge, but was easily sanded off afterwards. After cutting all the legs out for the first pickler, I was really happy with how they looked. That was until I realized that the 2 legs with the inset on them can't be the same. That is because the holes need to be on the inside of the leg for the pegs, and the inset portion needs to be at the top. So they actually have to mirror each other so the holes are on the correct sides. This isn't the first time that the orientation of pieces has bitten me in the butt. If I would have taken the time to make a true 3D model of the pickler in Fusion, I would have realized this. But not all is lost. I just needed to make 1 more of the long legs with the correct orientation. I wanted to speed up the process for the second pickler, so I decided to cut all the leg pieces all out at once instead of cutting them 2 at a time.
All right, so I've been having some issues with the CNC. The problem I'm having is I need a larger CNC. But in order to make this work, I'm cutting 36-inch pieces on a 33 by 33-inch CNC bed. How am I doing that? I'm doing that by running them at a 45-degree angle. You can actually cut longer parts if you run them at a 45-degree angle. So I've been trying to do that. The problem I've been running into is lining them up on the CNC bed. So one, that the shape that I'm cutting fits the stock that I have. I'm running out of room. As you can see here, the CNC reaches the end of its 33 inches and just, it can't go any further. So it just limits out. All right, so I'm gonna try on the CNC again. I think my solution on the CNC is I can't run all 4 parts at the same time. There's just not enough room for error there. So I'm gonna run 2 parts at a time, and that's the next thing I'm gonna try.
But rather than wasting this walnut, because the hole alignment is perfect, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some double-sided tape and take a leg that I've already have cut out, and I'm going to stick it to the stock and trace it out. I don't want to waste this walnut, and there's a way around it with a flush trim bit. So let me show you how I did that. First, I attached the wood and the template together using double-sided tape. Then I used my bandsaw to cut out the rough shape using the template as a guide. Then I went over to the router table, and using a flush trim bit, I trimmed everything to the final shape. Then I could separate the two pieces and put the round over on all the edges. It's as simple as that. Man, do I love a good flush trim bit. I have a link in the description to my favorite flush trim bit. Using code AndyBird at checkout will get you 5% off. If you do, you're also supporting me and what I do, and so I am thankful for that. At this point, I had all my legs I needed, and I was able to salvage most of the walnut I had messed up. But I still needed the triangle support pieces. To do this, I used the plywood triangle from the last prototype as a template. This process was the same process I did to save the legs. Template, double-sided tape, bandsaw, flush trim, round over. Alright, so I needed some knobs for this project, and originally I was just going to buy them, but that would have looked terrible. Beautiful walnut legs with plastic knobs. No thank you. So I decided to make my own. I whipped up a quick file and cut them out of some walnut. I cut the head off some 1/4-inch hex bolts and used some 5-minute epoxy to hold them in place. I mounted threaded inserts into the short legs that would receive the bolt and hold everything together. Unfortunately, this didn't work out exactly as I planned because the force that was exerted on the knobs when tightening was too much. So for my second attempt, I drilled all the way through the knob and put a bolt through and countersunk a nut onto the backside. This has proved to work much, much better. The placement of the pivot point hole was a little tricky. This is where the bolt from the knob would go through and enable the pickler to fold up. But to my surprise, this part actually went fairly smoothly. Once I figured out the measurements for the first one, it was a matter of just repeating it on the next 5. I also took these measurements back into Fusion and added them to the model, so next time the CNC will pre-drill these holes for me and I won't have to measure. All the files that I'm offering for this project have been revised a bunch of times to work out all the kinks. So the issues that I've run into, you won't. Next, I added a round over to all the edges, filled all the knots, and sanded to 120 grit. I first assembled the support triangle to the long legs using glue and screws. Then I added the dowel rungs using wood glue. I had to use some clamps here to help hold everything together while the glue dried. In reality, the hole sizing could have been a tiny bit smaller, maybe 1.04. But in the end, it all worked out. After assembling the two picklers, I was worried how my friends, who are getting the flat pack version of this pickler, would assemble it. They don't have the clamps like I did to help hold everything together while the glue is drying. So I came up with the solution of buying larger dowels that were 1 1/8 and 1/8 instead of just 1 inch. These were way too big for the 1.05 diameter holes I had created, but I could sand the dowels down to get a tighter fit. So at the time of making this video, the flat pack is in the mail and on the way to my friend's house. So the results are yet to be seen, but I am going to be getting feedback from them that is extremely valuable. Today we're going to make these 3 different catch-all trays. There are endless designs for these trays, but today we're making this beginner, intermediate, and advanced designs. Catch-all trays are something that is really easy to make on the CNC, and they sell really well too. If this is something that you haven't made, then I highly recommend it. Everything you need to make these trays on your own CNC will be linked in the description below. I'm using this cherry hardwood that I've prepared ahead of time for all 3 of these trays. But you can use any flat, dry hardwood that you have available. I'm starting by attaching the wood to the CNC bed using this double-sided tape. This Burbon carpet tape is my favorite. It holds really well and doesn't leave a residue when you peel it off. The first tool path is a roughing tool path with this 3/4 inch diameter bowl and tray bit. It has a 1/4 inch radius on the bottom that will give us a nice round edge at the bottom of the pocket of our tray. The goal of this pocketing toolpath is to remove material as quickly as possible. This is done with a larger step over, but it does leave these ridges behind. So this roughing toolpath went to a depth of 0.45 inches, which is 0.05 less than our total desired depth. That's because we'll come back and clean this up with our next toolpath, which is a finish pocketing toolpath. This is done with the same exact bit as the first toolpath, but there are two main differences. The first difference is the depth. This toolpath starts where the other one left off, at the 0.45 inches, and will continue down to our final depth of 0.5. The second difference is the step over. We're going to tighten our step over to 0.08. Remember, in the first toolpath, it was 0.375, so this is quite the difference. This moves the passes closer together, giving us a nice, smooth finish, getting rid of all those ridges and limiting the amount of sanding we need to do. The final toolpath is the profile or contour toolpath that cuts the outside shape of the tray. I'm using a 1/4 inch down bit for this one. Because we're using double-sided tape, there is no need for tabs. Next, I took it over to my workbench and cleaned it up with some 120 grit sandpaper and applied this natural finish from Total Boat. So here it is, a nice, simple catch-all tray with a nice radius on the bottom that bowl and tray bit created. This is nothing special when it comes to design, just a basic tray. But the cool thing about it is it can be made really quickly and is really easy to batch out on the CNC. All right, moving to the next tray, the intermediate tray. We're going to be doing the same exact process as the first one, but in the shape of a pumpkin and adding some engraving just to up the level of design. We're starting with this pumpkin SVG file that I created. This file is available on my website, and I'll leave a link down in the description below if you want to make one yourself. Just like the first tray, we're starting with a pocketing toolpath to rough out our shape and design, and then coming back with another pocketing toolpath with a tighter step over to get this nice clean finish. So the next step, this is where things get a little different. The next toolpath is an engraving toolpath. There are different ways to go about this, but in Vectric, there is a specific engraving toolpath. Engraving is a way to customize anything. We could personalize this tray or any tray with someone's name, with a quote, with a date, or just to add another design feature like we are here. I ran this engraving toolpath again. It really cleans up your engravings, and I do this anytime I'm using a V-bit just to get better results. Now that those lines are carved on the pumpkin, you can see how it just takes it up a notch. All right, the last toolpath is the same as the first tray, and we're using a 1/4 inch downcut bit to cut out the outer profile of this pumpkin. All right, just like the previous one, I took this over to the workbench, cleaned it up with a little sandpaper, and finished it with this food grade finish. I really like how this small little tray came out. It just feels more intentional than the first one. Like it has a purpose. I can picture better what it's going to be used for, meaning I can picture better how to sell it. So this is going to be used in the fall. It can be used for Halloween with the pumpkin themes, but it can also use Thanksgiving. So there's a big window to sell this. And with those engraving details, it just looks like a more quality product. Now, this is smaller than the other tray, but this could be scaled up to any size. I just like the little small candy dish. It can be used as a decoration too. So a lot of options here. All right, so let's move on to the advanced design tray. We're doing something completely different here. I started with an STL file that I purchased off Etsy. I did not make this file, I'm not selling this file, but I will link into the description below where you can purchase this file. STL files are 3D files that are commonly used in 3D printing, but you can machine them as well. I imported the file into Vectric Aspire to set up the toolpaths and adjust the scale. The first toolpath is a 3D roughing toolpath. I did this using a 1/4 inch ball nose bit. I did make sure that the toolpath was going in the same direction as the wood grain. You'll always get a better, smoother finish going with the grain than you will against it. You can see the first toolpath leaves a less than desirable result with all these ridges, but that's just because of the same reason that we had the ridges in the first one. It's a wider step over to cover area faster and remove material as quick as possible. We came back with a finishing 3D toolpath using a 1/8 inch tapered ball nose. Combined with a 12% step over, this bit is able to get into all the tight spots and gives it a nice finish. I could have tightened the step over here to below 10% and got an even smoother finish, but I kind of like the look. I took it over to the drill press and cleaned it up with a sanding star. I realized I had a small gap in the turtle's head here, so I filled it with some CA glue and sanded that area again. I applied a spar urethane to this tray because it's going to be in our bathroom, and I wanted to give it a little more protection from water and moisture. So this turtle is my first ever two-sided project. So I did the roughing and finishing pass on the back side first, flipped it over, and then did the roughing and finishing toolpath on the top side. I was a little nervous for everything to line up, but it came out really, really good. Overall, I'm really happy with how all these trays came out. All right, so we are on day 3 now. You saw me carve and pour, carve and pour, carve and pour, and that's been the process over the last few days. Each layer took about 10 hours to dry. So after it was poured, took 10 hours, and then I was able to carve the next layer. Everything has gone basically according to plan, except one spot that is a big if, the white and the pink. I tried pouring them at the same time. We might have had a little mix up here, so we might need to do a little recovery. We'll see how that turns out once we carve the black. One thing I haven't done that I probably should have is surface. I've got quite the epoxy like overflow built up. I probably should surface, but I only have one layer left, so I'm just gonna slow it down, take the feed rate down a little bit on the CNC, and fill in the black. I think it'll be okay. All right, so what happened is we're cutting too much material, heat built up, and snapped this. It's just too much for this 1/4" shank. Problem is I can't resurface now because I run the risk of chipping out because I have voids in these areas. So I'm just gonna keep pressing on. I'm mixing up this black epoxy, and while I'm doing that, I'm gonna talk to you about some potential problems I discovered with that black layer. For some reason, my overlaps aren't possibly correct. We've got some weird issues happening in here with the lightning bolt, and this is where I'm at. I should have surfaced it. So I got all the black poured. I'm gonna wait for this to dry. Should be about 10 hours. And then I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna do a surfacing pass, and that's gonna reveal really, truly what it looks like. And at that point, we'll decide, hey, is this good enough to ship out, or do we need to scramble and make another one? So we'll see. After we surface it, we will do a toolpath around the outside here, and this will come out, and it should be solid epoxy, no MDF showing. That's the goal. Well, I wouldn't say this was a success. I think it's, if it's on a meter, like success is over here and failure is over here, I'm probably closer to the failure. I can't send this to Mr. Beast the way it is. Too many errors. I think my y-axis got shifted on a couple of the layers. I didn't notice it until later, you know, because I already noted that I haven't surfaced. So the question is, it is currently Friday and the live stream is a week from tomorrow. So do I have enough time to remake this, and will it turn out? Like, what errors, what do I need to do to correct it? But I've got to see this through. I've got to see this project through. The timeline is tight, obviously. Spending more time and money on this is not something I want to do, but I'm going to do it, and we're going to see how it turns out. So I'm going to make a couple tweaks, mainly to the file, and making sure my zero, my X, Y, and Z zero does not change. And I think with those tweaks, same colors, it's going to turn out great. All right, so here we are. We've come a long ways. Both external and internal circumstances has made this more difficult than I initially thought it was going to be. That's okay. We've overcome. We're here. We've got the sign drying. I did a flood pour last night, clear epoxy, and we're waiting for it to dry. Today is Tuesday. This needs to be there, well, needs to already be there. But the live stream is this Saturday, so literally 4 days from now. We're trying to get this in the mail today. That's one of the hurdles, is getting this in the mail and getting it out of the way. Problem is, we can't stick it in the box if the epoxy's still wet or indentable. So right now you can see your fingerprints if you grab it. Just kind of, it's not wet, it's just a little tacky. So we're waiting for it to fully cure. The second thing, which I hope all this effort it won't go unwasted. We've learned a lot. That's one of the true values here. We learned a ton through this process. But will Mr. Beast open it? I don't know. Will he see it on his live stream? Will it be hung up in a studio? Will I be able to say I have a piece that I've made in Mr. Beast's studio? That's yet to be seen.
On to the point of the stream.
Yes.
We
Wait,
asked you
there's a
guys.
point?
Yes, there is. We asked you guys to send your best fan art, stuff to decorate our walls.
I didn't know what you were gonna shoot.
Oh,
tree
man.
helmet.
Whoa!
This is a Chandler if I've ever seen
Yo.
one.
Oh my god.
Ooh, Jimmy's gonna like this one. This is a Jimmy.
that
Jimmy.
I fell out. Jimmy,
Jimmy Butt. Jimmy Butt. Jimmy.
Jimmy, is this
Yeah,
enough fan art?
Vaporwave Jimmy.
Oh, yeah,
2016. I had.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
2016.
Today we're gonna make 87 Burbon Smokers all in one car. We're gonna sell these for $25 a piece. That's over $2,000 in less than a half a day. All right, so now that the bowl and tray bit has given us the contours that we want and kind of roughed out the material, we're gonna swap it out for this 1/4" downcut bit that's gonna do all of our profile cuts for us. That was a close call. The air hose for the air assist for the laser got caught on the back of the CNC. That could have been bad. So the 1/4" downcut bit just finished up its toolpath. Went well. Honestly, everything lined up great. I'm happy with that. Now it's time to do some customization, and we're gonna do that by switching to my laser. So, the power of CNC and production in my 2-car garage blows my mind every time I see this or do something like this. It just, the capability blows my mind. So these are the filters that I use, and they will be linked in the description below. They're just off Amazon. Here's one of those prototypes that I was talking about that I had made, and I just got this to show you how this fits in here. So this is just designed to be friction fit. It just sets in there just like that. Then what you do is you just take a pinch. You don't need a lot. You see how much I've got there? A pinch, drop it into the bourbon smoker, maybe a little bit more. And this doesn't have to be just bourbon. This can be a cocktail smoker, whiskey, anything you can imagine you can smoke. So the next key part is the torch that you use. I've got these little butane torches off from Amazon that work well. I'll link them in the description as well. But the key is that whatever you're using is blowing downward or blowing in. A lighter won't work because the smoke will just raise up. So you need that blowing thing. So let's see if we can get it to work here. Watch the bottom, the smoke will come out the bottom. All right, so watch right here, the smoke will come out the bottom. This will be over a glass, but it just burns it. And so yeah, but the key is that you have a torch that blows through the bottom. What I want to do is I want to slow it down and go over some of the details. All right, so we're literally going to start. Step one, I milled down the wood. So in order to do this isn't one big glue up. This is 11 individual panels that are 4 inches and 5/16 wide. And that is based on the space I need for the width of my bourbon smoker. So the width of the bourbon smoker is 3 inches, but then I need space for my 1/4 inch bit to cut on both sides. So that puts at 4 inches. So I had 5/16, and that is split on both sides of clearance on each board. So in order to do this, you have to mill all the boards to the exact same size. Then what I do is I come into my software. I'm using Vectric here, and I create rectangles that are exactly the same size as my stock material. Then what I do is I align my design, so my bourbon smoker design, to those rectangles. So think about it as like you're aligning your vectors to the boards. And then what I do is once I get everything laid out in there, I know everything's lined up, and I come over and I lay the boards exactly how I got them laid in Vectric, and I know everything is going to be perfectly lined up. So that's what I did today, and it works flawlessly every single time. Everything hit its marks and everything was aligned perfectly. So you may be wondering why I didn't carve a smoker out of this bottom left-hand corner. And the reason is because that's where I zeroed to. And I didn't want to carve a smoker there and lose the opportunity to reset my XYZ 0. If something had went wrong, this was kind of my safety. Now, I could go back and carve a smoker out of it last, and that's something that I thought of after the fact. But basically, this was my safety area where I knew it wasn't going to move, it wasn't going to change, and I could always go back and reset my 0. So you saw the first pocket. It's kind of my main pocket. I used a bowl and tray bit, a 3/4 inch bowl and tray bit with a 1/2 inch shank. On the spindle on the Avid CNC, you can take 1/2 inch shank bits, and so I was able to run that at 250 inches per minute, which is a lot for a 3/4 inch bit. So that's how much material I was running, cutting on the first pass. And then I was doing, I'll have to look exactly, I'll put it down here, but the step over was something like 20%. And so that's how far the bit's moving over each time. So that is a merge tool path, as you can see here on the screen. 2 pockets. So that was the big pocket, the small pocket. The big pocket went to a depth of 5/8. So that's another thing to mention. The white oak stock that I started with was milled to 7/8, which is 0.875. So I went down 1/4 inch, which gives me a 5/8 thickness overall. And I do that because I want this chimney here. And I use a bowl and tray bit because I want that contour on the bottom of the chimney and on the inside. So those are the 2 pockets. The middle pocket goes a little bit deeper, It goes 3/8, I believe. And so that's the first merged toolpath. All right, so before I forget, merged toolpaths. You'll see that these are grouped into two merged toolpaths. And that is for the similar bits. It's the same bit, but two different toolpaths. And what that does is rather than going and doing the first main toolpath first on every single one and traveling back to do the second one, it does the main toolpath and then it comes over, because it's using the same exact tool, comes over and does this one. So it's half the amount of traveling, because it's basically you're doing one lap versus two laps around all the boards. So next, the second merge toolpath that's when we did the tool change. We switched to the 1/4" down cut bit. And there's 3 toolpaths in there. 2 pockets, which are one for the filter and then one to cut all the way through for the smoke to come out the bottom. And then the profile cut around the outside. I'm holding these in place with 2 tabs on the corners where I have the strategically placed on the bulk of the material. I didn't do it right on the sides because I didn't know how close I would be to the edge of the material, and if I didn't have material there, then it would just get cut off. So I'll cut all the tabs with a multi-tool. Yeah, it's going to take a while, but I built this whole setup to make sure nothing moved on me, and because if anything moved, it would throw the whole thing off. So I want to make sure nothing moved at all. I didn't use any double-sided tape. It's all physical tabs and screws to hold everything in place. So feeds and speeds for the 1/4" bit. This is where I could have improved. I was really happy with the bowl and tray bit, but the toolpath for the 1/4" down cut bit, the negative is that I was recutting a lot of material. So a down cut bit is ejecting all those chips downwards. And what dulls bits very quickly is recutting material you've already recut. In order to film the first couple of the process without my dust shoe on, I had dust collection on, but I didn't have the dust shoe on so I could film it for you. Then I realized I would have had to restart over if I wanted to put the dust shoe back on, and I didn't want to do that. So I just ran it without the dust shoe. So as you saw, a lot of dust built up on the surface, and I was just recutting that material every time. So I did have to slow my initial feed rate of 200 inches per minute on that bit down to, I slowed it down a third, so it's 66%. So I was still going 120, 130 inches per minute on that toolpath. So what would I improve? One, I would improve the dust collection to try to get more of those chips out of there, and then I would have been able to run faster. That was just an observation on my part. As it was going, I'm like, it's recutting a lot of chips. It's a lot of load. If I don't slow that down, it's going to end up heating up really, especially cutting all these, it's going to heat up really fast, and then that leads to bits breaking. So that was kind of an adjustment on the fly. The last thing, as far as toolpaths go, is the laser toolpath. Yes, that's right, laser toolpath. If you noticed, obviously you noticed, I did it all without removing anything. I carved everything with the CNC router. I switched over to the laser, and it's as simple as, with my Avid setup, is as easy as switching from the bowl and tray bit to the down cut bit. So the laser is pretty self-explanatory. Again, I'm in Kentucky, and we're going to be selling these at Kentucky craft fairs. We've got 4 craft fairs coming up that this is going to be stock for, and so that is why I put Kentucky on all of them. I think it's going to be really, really good. So next steps, like I said, is to use a multi-tool, cut all the tabs out, get all these out, take them to the oscillating belt sander, clean up the tabs, clean up the edges a little bit, and then I'm going to sand them a little bit, probably with one of those mop sanders, just to take the rough edges off them, and then they're going to be ready to go. I haven't decided. I might put a mineral oil finish on them, but to be honest with you, I don't think I'm going to. I think I might just leave them the way they are. I don't know. That's yet to be seen. If you have any input on that, let me know down in the comments below or what you thought. So one other thought about cleaning them up is in the toolpaths, in the profile toolpaths, the final cutout, I have it set up to do separate last pass. And this is set at 0.02 inches, so 0.02 of an inch. So if the first pass on your tool path, you only go down halfway, right? So say my depth of cut was 0.3, you're gonna have a tool mark there. So what I do is it goes down 0.3, and then it goes down another 0.3, and then it moves over horizontally 0.02 inches, and so it cleans up all of those tooling marks on the edges. So that really helps too. So honestly, if I wasn't using tabs, they would be very clean on the edges. So for making 87 of anything, the amount of issues I had today were very little. And until Andrew, my cameraman, showed up, he's bad luck. But as the CNC was going, I was off to the side and I was looking. One of the air hoses for the laser got stuck on the back side of the CNC. And the CNC was all the way forward. And so luckily I have a lot of slack. Kind of see over here on the side. Luckily I had a lot of slack because otherwise it would have snapped that off, and that would have put us back a little while. So I would have had to reconnect it. Not a big deal. But other than that, and other than the dust collection and the downcut bit recutting chips, it was a pretty flawless day, which that is a knock on a lot of oak wood. Now, something I didn't talk about is I did run some tests. Like I said in that other video, that was working out all the kinks, switching from routing to lasering and learning that whole process. So I did I ran like 5 tests on single Burbon smokers just to try to dial it in and dial the design. So it wasn't like I just did the file, jumped out here and hit go. There was a lot of previous work done, but it all worked out because today was a flawless day of CNCing, and it makes me a lot happy. Makes me a lot happy. So we're gonna sell these at our 4 upcoming markets. So we're gonna sell these for a minimum of $25 a piece. So 25 times 87 equals $2,175. Now we're gonna subtract the raw material cost, which is $150 for the white oak. So we have $2,025. Now let's figure out the time that we have into this. So from milling the wood until now, we have under 3.5 hours. It's like 3 hours and 15 minutes. Let's just do 3.5 hours. So divide that by 3.5, and that is $578.57 per hour. So that is not a bad half day's worth of work. So one thing I wanted to do with this video was show the true performance of my Avid CNC. And a lot of that is I'm the limiting factor. This machine is capable of a lot more. And I hope a lot of you can relate to that. So if you have a smaller machine, like I did, and I still do, I have my Shapeoko downstairs. Obviously you can't do it at these speeds, and maybe not at this scale, but you can 100%. I've proven that concept over and over again. I will have a video up here, over here somewhere, about how I used to do batches on my Shapeoko CNC. And it took longer. The batches were smaller. I couldn't make as much money as fast. But that is why there is a difference between a machine like this and a machine like that. So hopefully this draws kind of a clearer picture. I don't want this to make it feel like, oh, you can't do this or anything like that. Like, you totally can do this. It just might be smaller, but I think it's a disservice if you don't understand what a machine like this is capable of.
So those are my 21 favorite projects over the last 5 years. If you've made it this far in the video, check out this video right here where I share even more projects. Thanks for watching. See ya.